The crisp October air in downtown Chicago carried the scent of fallen leaves as I adjusted my navy blue dress and watched my son Marcus walk down the aisle of St. Patrick's Cathedral with his bride-to-be, Jessica. Tears gathered in my eyes, not just from the joy of seeing my only child get married, but from the pain I'd been carrying for the past 8 months since Marcus began treating me like a burden in his carefully curated new life with Jessica's wealthy family. The tension had started when Jessica's mother, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, began planning what she called an appropriate wedding for someone of Jessica's social standing. As a retired police officer living on a modest pension in my small apartment in Rogers Park, I was systematically excluded from every major decision while being relegated to the role of Marcus's mother, rather than an integral part of the celebration. For 28 years, I had raised Marcus alone after his father, Detective Robert Chen, was killed in the line of duty when Marcus was just 4 years old, leaving me to navigate single motherhood while grieving the loss of my partner and best friend. If this story is touching your heart, please comment below where you're watching from, give this video a like, and subscribe to our channel because we truly help families going through these difficult situations. Your support helps us continue sharing these stories of overcoming adversity. What Marcus and Jessica didn't know was that 2 months ago, I had received a phone call that would change everything forever. Attorney Margaret Sullivan, specializing in estate law and unclaimed properties, had contacted me about a legal investigation that had taken nearly 3 decades to complete. Apparently, Robert had purchased 3 rental apartments in Lincoln Park shortly before his death, using his police pension contributions and a small inheritance from his grandmother that he had never mentioned to me during our marriage. The properties had been managed by a real estate company for all these years, with the rental income accumulating in an account that I was legally entitled to inherit. Due to bureaucratic errors and my address changes over the decades, the management company had been unable to locate me to inform me of my inheritance. The accumulated rental income, combined with property appreciation over nearly 30 years, totaled just over $2.8 million that was rightfully mine as Robert's widow and legal heir. During all these years of financial struggle, working double shifts as a patrol officer and later as a detective to pay for Marcus's private school education and college tuition, there had been this substantial nest egg waiting for me without my knowledge. The irony was both bitter and sweet. I finally had the financial security I had always dreamed of, but my son was treating me like an embarrassment in front of his new wealthy in-laws who viewed me as beneath their social status. The wedding was taking place at one of Chicago's most prestigious venues, the Chicago Cultural Center, where Jessica had insisted on having the reception despite the astronomical cost that her parents had readily agreed to cover. Her family belonged to that established Chicago society that had never known financial worry, old money families who owned businesses and properties throughout the city while I had spent my career protecting their neighborhoods from crime. Jessica had specifically requested that I wear something understated and sit in the 4th row, not the traditional front row reserved for the mother of the groom. Her reasoning was that her grandparents, who had contributed significantly to the wedding expenses, needed to be seated closer to the ceremony. The humiliation had been constant throughout the 6 months of wedding planning, from subtle exclusions to outright dismissive comments about my limited resources and working-class background. The ceremony proceeded without incident, with Father O'Brien officiating the union while I struggled against the lump in my throat watching Marcus so happy and apparently oblivious to the pain his growing distance had caused me over the past year. Robert would have been so proud to see his son become a successful investment banker, working for a prestigious firm downtown and building his own family, achieving all the dreams we had discussed during those difficult nights after his funeral when Marcus was still a young boy. Chicago's autumn weather was typical for October, with gray clouds threatening rain and that characteristic wind that makes the city famous. The reception would be held in the Cultural Center's stunning Preston Bradley Hall, with its magnificent stained glass dome and elegant marble columns that provided a breathtaking backdrop for what Jessica called the wedding of the season among her social circle. During the drive to the reception, I traveled alone in my 10-year-old Honda, while Jessica's family arrived in a convoy of luxury vehicles with hired drivers. The contrast was evident in every detail, from the quality of their designer outfits to the casual way they discussed expenses that represented months of my police pension. Their conversations centered around investment portfolios, vacation homes, and business ventures that involved more money than I had earned in my entire career. Upon arriving at the reception venue, the decoration was breathtaking. Imported white roses and orchids, crystal chandeliers reflecting light throughout the historic hall, tables draped in silk linens, and a view of Grant Park that was absolutely stunning. Everything had been paid for by Jessica's parents, who never missed an opportunity to subtly remind me of my lower economic position through seemingly innocent comments about the sacrifice required to include everyone in such an expensive celebration. Mrs. Whitmore had arranged the seating, placing me at table 12, alongside distant cousins and casual acquaintances, while she occupied the head table with the newlyweds and immediate family members. The exclusion was deliberate and painful, especially considering that I was Marcus's only immediate family, the person who had dedicated her entire adult life to raising and educating him without help from anyone after Robert's death. During dinner, I overheard conversations about real estate investments, European vacations, and business acquisitions that reminded me constantly of the economic gap between our families. Jessica's guests spoke casually about figures that represented fortunes to me, while I smiled politely and tried not to feel out of place in what should have been my moment of pride as the mother of the groom. The most painful moment came during the toasts, when Mrs. Whitmore took the microphone to give an emotional speech about how Jessica had chosen wisely in finding Marcus, but specifically mentioning that she hoped my son would be capable of maintaining the lifestyle Jessica was accustomed to without needing external assistance. The implication was clear and humiliating, suggesting that I represented a potential financial burden for the young couple. Marcus, who had consumed more champagne than usual, stood up to respond to his mother-in-law's toast with words that pierced my heart like daggers. He spoke about his gratitude toward Jessica's family for accepting him despite his humble origins, and mentioned that he hoped to completely independence himself from any responsibility toward the past to build a prosperous future alongside his wife. His words were received with enthusiastic applause from Jessica's family members. The humiliation was complete when Marcus added that he hoped everyone could understand that his new life required certain adjustments in his previous family relationships, and that he expected everyone's understanding to make those necessary changes. The look he directed at me while saying these words made it clear he was specifically referring to minimizing my presence in his future life. Sitting at my relegated table, surrounded by strangers discussing topics that were foreign to me, I made a decision I had been considering for weeks. I discreetly took out my phone and sent a text message to Attorney Sullivan. Please proceed with the complete transfer. I want the funds available tomorrow morning in the account we discussed. The inheritance of nearly $3 million would finally be officially mine. Traditional jazz music filled the hall while couples danced and celebrated, but I felt like a spectator in my own son's life. A local band played classic Chicago jazz standards in honor of the newlyweds, and I watched Marcus dance happily with Jessica, completely oblivious to the pain he had caused me with his words and distant attitude during the months of preparation for this celebration. I decided to leave the reception early, quietly saying goodbye to the few acquaintances at my table and avoiding the drama of interrupting the festivities with my departure. Marcus was so absorbed in his new family connections that he didn't even notice when I briefly approached to give him a kiss on the cheek and whisper that I hoped he would be very happy in his marriage. Arriving at my small apartment in Rogers Park, I sat in my modest living room with a cup of coffee and reflected on the years of sacrifice that had led to this moment. I remembered the nights working double shifts at the police station to pay Marcus's private school tuition, the weekends working security at events to afford his school uniforms and supplies, the vacations we never took because every dollar was important for his education and future opportunities. The next morning brought both the emotional hangover from the wedding and bank confirmation that the inheritance had been successfully transferred to my account. $2.8 million appeared in my bank statement as a tangible reminder that Robert had thought about our future even in his final days, purchasing those investment properties that had finally come into my possession after nearly 3 decades. During the following weeks, Marcus and Jessica departed for their honeymoon in Europe, a trip financed by her parents and extensively documented on social media where they appeared at elegant restaurants, luxury hotels, and exclusive tourist destinations. The photographs they shared showed a life of abundance that contrasted dramatically with the austerity in which we had lived during his childhood and adolescence following Robert's death. While they enjoyed their European honeymoon, I made important decisions about my new financial future. I hired a financial advisor recommended by Attorney Sullivan, and we began working on a diversified investment portfolio that would allow me to live comfortably while generating passive income for the rest of my life. I also explored opportunities to purchase additional rental properties in emerging neighborhoods of Chicago, thinking about investments that could generate long-term income. One of my first purchases was a beautiful condominium in Lincoln Park, not far from where Jessica's family lived. But I chose a building that was elegant yet discreet, avoiding unnecessary attention. I wanted financial security without ostentation, preferring to maintain a low profile while adapting to this new financial reality that still seemed surreal after decades of careful budget management and financial constraints. I also decided to make some investments in personal wellness that I had postponed for years due to budget limitations. I joined a quality fitness center, updated my wardrobe with elegant but understated pieces, and scheduled the medical checkups I had been delaying for financial reasons. It was time to take care of myself after decades dedicated exclusively to caring for others. First Robert during his illness, then Marcus throughout his childhood and education. Marcus's return from his honeymoon brought a cold and distant phone call where he informed me that he and Jessica had made the decision to establish clear boundaries in our family interactions. He explained that they would visit only on very specific special occasions, and that he hoped I would understand their need to focus on their new family without external interference that might cause tension in their marriage. The phone conversation lasted less than 15 minutes, and Marcus seemed to be reading from a prepared script, probably developed together with Jessica during their European vacation. He informed me that they had purchased a house in Lincoln Park, an exclusive residential development, thanks to a loan that Jessica's parents had provided to help them establish themselves as an independent couple in an appropriate neighborhood. 2 months after the wedding, my life had completely changed, but not in the way I had expected when I dreamed about my son's marriage. I had financial security for the first time in my adult life, but I had effectively lost the close relationship with Marcus that had been the center of my existence for more than 3 decades since Robert's death. The personal transformation I experienced during this period was profound and unexpected. After decades dedicated exclusively to being a mother, police officer, and provider, I finally had time and resources to rediscover who I was as an independent individual. I enrolled in watercolor painting classes, a hobby I had abandoned in college when Marcus was born, and discovered that I retained both the skill and passion for artistic expression that had been dormant for so many years. I also began traveling modestly but meaningfully, visiting places within the United States that I had always wanted to see but never could afford. Napa Valley, Asheville, Savannah, destinations I had seen in magazines, but that had remained as unattainable dreams during my years as a single mother with limited resources and the responsibility of Marcus's education and future. 6 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected call from Marcus. His voice sounded different, less confident, and he asked if we could meet to discuss some important things. There was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't a simple social visit, but that something had changed in his life that required my attention or possibly my help. We met at a coffee shop in the Loop, neutral and comfortable for both of us. Marcus arrived punctually but looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes that I hadn't noticed in the social media photographs I had seen during the previous months. He had lost weight, and his usual confidence seemed to have diminished considerably since the last time we had been together in person. The conversation began with uncomfortable apologies about his behavior during the wedding and the months afterward. Marcus admitted that he had allowed himself to be influenced by social pressure and the expectations of Jessica's family, trying to fit into a world that wasn't really his, but that he believed was necessary for his happiness and marital success. Tears began to flow from his eyes as he described how lost he had felt in his new life. He told me about the financial problems that had emerged when the loan for the house turned out to be more expensive than they had initially calculated. The monthly payments, combined with the lifestyle Jessica expected to maintain, had created constant financial pressure that was affecting their marriage and his emotional well-being. He had realized that he had traded his authenticity for an image he couldn't sustain financially or emotionally. Jessica had begun making disparaging comments about his humble origins whenever financial difficulties arose, constantly reminding him that her family had invested in their marriage and expected certain results. The dynamic had become toxic, with Jessica using her parents' financial support as a tool for emotional control in the relationship, threatening to involve them whenever Marcus questioned their spending habits. Marcus confessed that he had attempted to obtain additional loans to maintain the lifestyle Jessica demanded, but had realized he was entering a spiral of debt that could ruin his financial future. The pressure to maintain appearances had begun to significantly affect his work performance and mental health, creating a cycle of stress that was impacting every aspect of his life. While listening to my son describe his difficulties, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pain at seeing him suffer, satisfaction that he finally recognized the value of our relationship, and an unexpected opportunity to repair the damage we had suffered as a family. But I also recognized that this was an important lesson Marcus needed to learn about authenticity and real values in life. I offered him my unconditional emotional support, but was clear that any practical help would depend on genuine changes in his attitude toward our relationship and toward the values that had been important in our family during all the years of struggle after Robert's death. I didn't mention the inheritance yet, wanting to ensure that his remorse was genuine and not motivated by desperate financial needs. During the following weeks, Marcus began visiting me regularly, initially to vent about his marital problems, but gradually rediscovering the comfort and unconditional support that had characterized our relationship before his marriage. We talked about mistakes, forgiveness, and the importance of maintaining authenticity in all relationships, including marriage, and how Robert would have wanted him to handle these challenges. Jessica didn't approve of these visits and had begun creating conflicts every time Marcus mentioned spending time with me. The tension in their marriage intensified when Marcus began questioning some of the excessive expenses she considered necessary to maintain their social status among their friends in Lincoln Park and among Chicago's young professional social scene. The crisis came when Jessica gave him an ultimatum: choose between maintaining a close relationship with me or preserving their marriage. She argued that my negative influence was making Marcus question the financial and social decisions they had made together, and that it was necessary to completely cut off any emotional dependence on his mother for their marriage to prosper and for him to mature as a husband. Marcus called me that night, crying over the phone as he told me about Jessica's ultimatum and his confusion about what decision to make. It was evident that he had matured considerably during the months of pressure and stress, and that he was finally beginning to evaluate his life based on his own values instead of the external expectations he had been trying to fulfill since his engagement. It was at that moment that I decided to reveal the truth about the inheritance. I explained the entire situation: Robert's investment properties, the years they had remained unclaimed, the legal process that had resulted in the transfer of nearly $3 million to my name. Marcus was in complete shock, unable to initially process the magnitude of what I was telling him about his father's foresight and planning. The revelation completely changed his perspective on the economic dynamics that had been controlling his life for the past year. He realized that I had had the resources to compete with Jessica's family financially, but had chosen not to in order to allow him to learn important lessons about character, values, and authenticity in relationships without the influence of money. He also understood that his behavior during the wedding and the months afterward had been especially painful, considering that I had been dealing with this new financial reality while being treated as an economic burden by his new in-laws. The irony of the situation was evident. He had been rejecting the only person in his life who actually had the financial capacity to support him without conditions or manipulations. Marcus made a brave but necessary decision. He confronted Jessica about the ultimatum and explained that he wasn't willing to cut the relationship with his mother as a condition for continuing their marriage. He also communicated his intention to reevaluate their lifestyle and reduce unnecessary expenses to live within their actual means, regardless of her social expectations and her family's standards. Jessica's reaction was predictable but devastating. She escalated the conflict by involving her parents, who threatened to withdraw their financial support if Marcus didn't control his new attitude and return to the behavior he had shown during the first months of marriage. The economic manipulation that had been subtle during their engagement became explicit and aggressive. Marcus's marriage officially ended 6 months later, when Jessica decided she couldn't deal with a husband who didn't share her social and economic priorities. The divorce process was relatively simple, considering they had been married for less than a year and had no children, although Marcus lost the house they had purchased together along with the money he had invested in the down payment. During this difficult period, I was the constant emotional support Marcus needed to process the end of his marriage and reevaluate his life priorities. We used part of the inheritance to ensure he had adequate legal representation during the divorce, and also to help him establish himself in a modest but comfortable apartment in a neighborhood that better suited his real values and financial situation. The experience had been painful but educational for both of us. Marcus learned valuable lessons about authenticity, the importance of maintaining solid family relationships, and the dangers of trying to live a life that doesn't reflect real personal values. I learned about the importance of forgiveness, patience, and allowing important people in our lives to make mistakes and learn from them. 6 months after the divorce, Marcus and I had rebuilt our relationship on a stronger and more mature foundation. He had developed a new appreciation for the sacrifices I had made during his childhood and adolescence, and I had found a balance between being a supportive mother and maintaining healthy boundaries that protected my own emotional well-being. We decided together how to use the inheritance responsibly and meaningfully. We established an educational fund to help children of fallen police officers obtain higher education, honoring Robert's memory and the values that had been important in our family. We also invested in additional rental properties that would provide stable long-term income while contributing to Chicago's housing market. Marcus returned to work with a new perspective on success and happiness, focusing on building a solid career based on his own merits and values instead of trying to impress others or maintain expensive appearances. His relationship with money became healthier and more realistic, understanding that financial security was important but shouldn't control the most important life decisions. 2 years after the wedding that had marked the lowest point in our relationship, Marcus met Sarah, an elementary school teacher who shared his values about family, authenticity, and the importance of genuine relationships over social appearances. Their courtship developed naturally and without pressure, based on real compatibility instead of superficial impressions or economic considerations. When Marcus introduced me to Sarah, it was immediately evident that this relationship was fundamentally different from what he had had with Jessica. Sarah treated me with genuine respect and warmth, showing real interest in getting to know me as a person and understanding the history Marcus and I had shared during all the years before she came into our lives. Marcus's second wedding, celebrated 3 years after the disaster with Jessica, was an intimate and authentic celebration in the garden of our new house, with local musicians, home-cooked food prepared by family and friends, and an atmosphere of genuine joy that contrasted dramatically with the cold ostentation of the first ceremony. Sarah had insisted that I occupy the place of honor as mother of the groom. During his speech at the reception, Marcus spoke publicly about the lessons he had learned about true love, the importance of family, and the value of maintaining relationships based on mutual respect and unconditional support. He specifically mentioned his mother's sacrifice and wisdom, who had demonstrated that true love sometimes requires patience and forgiveness, even when it hurts deeply. Our family's story had become one of redemption and growth, demonstrating that even the deepest wounds can heal when genuine love exists and the willingness to learn from mistakes. Robert would have been proud to see how his son had matured through difficulties and had finally found a life partner who valued real qualities instead of superficial ones. Today, 5 years after that painful wedding where I was relegated to being just a guest, I have a beautiful relationship with Marcus and Sarah, and I'm grandmother to 2 precious grandchildren who fill my life with joy and purpose. Robert's inheritance gave us financial security, but the lessons learned during the difficult years gave us something much more valuable: a deep understanding of unconditional love and the importance of remaining true to our most important values regardless of external pressures. Material wealth had arrived in our lives, but the emotional and family wealth we had rebuilt after almost losing it was the real treasure we had gained from this entire experience. We had learned that true love transcends economic and social differences, and that the most valuable relationships are those that survive the most difficult tests and emerge stronger on the other side.